This is my 92 Camaro, and these are the stock taillights, and I think they look like poo, so I made these. So the rough plan is to take the taillight assembly, keep the stock housing, and swap out the stock lenses for the new ones we're making. And the design of the new lenses is loosely based on what I believe is an original concept sketch for the 3rd Gen Camaro, but we will be making some slight tweaks to it. So we're going to be using acrylic to make these lenses, and in order to bend the acrylic we need a form to bend it around. In order to make the form we need a mold. So I've got this cardboard here that has this slick surface on it. It should be a little bit water resistant, and then I'm going to be using plaster to make the form. I know a lot of you guys are going to say, "Oh, those look like Mustang taillights." Oh. Well, the concept sketch was made before the stepped Mustang design was ever made, so I call dibs. So we got our molds here done. I'm going to be using plaster pairs to fill these up. I'm using this because it doesn't dry like a normal plaster. It actually cures more like concrete, so you can pour it real deep like this and it won't take all day or days to dry. It should also be easy to sand and work with once it is dry, so I can get it to the exact shape that I want. Now, I've never made anything like this before, so I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. So a really important skill in anything like this is to be good at failing. And I don't just mean being good at fixing your mistakes, but also planning on failing such that when it does fail, the result isn't catastrophic. You know, thinking before I do anything, what is likely to go wrong and how can I mitigate the effects of that? Alright, so we got these roughed in and it's looking really good so far. There's a couple minor things that I want to fix, like these air bubbles, corners that didn't quite fill in, and spots where the hot glue was that it couldn't get to. So we're going to mix up another small batch and patch those up, and then once it really hardens up, we should be able to sand it without constantly clogging the sandpaper. So I think we've got these as good as I'm going to get it. The only issue is on the corner here, it's a bit rough. I don't know if the acrylic is going to pick up those details. I tried putting some tape over it to smooth it out, but the tape won't stick to the plaster at all. So we've got plenty of acrylic to play with. I've got enough to make like 6 lenses, so if I mess it up, it's not a huge deal. So we'll see how this goes. All right, so we've got the acrylic rough cut to the right size. I'm going to try to just use the heat gun to do this. Some people will put the entire sheet of acrylic in the oven and then just lay it on there when it's soft. I'm not doing that, one because it's big and I don't think this would fit in the oven, but also I have some big flat surfaces, and if I don't heat those areas, then they should stay perfectly flat and they shouldn't have any wobbles in them. I also have a IR thermometer gun to see if I'm at the right temperature. So fingers crossed. Let's see how this goes. So the material I'm using is an 1/8 inch or about 3 millimeters thick, which I went with because anything thicker would be really difficult to bend around the tight corners. So I figure it's a good middle ground between durability and being able to get the corners nice and crisp. And even at just an 1/8 inch thick, I had to get it really hot and put a lot of force into it to get it to bend how I wanted. Alright, so I'm really glad that I bought enough acrylic to do this multiple times, because there's a lot of good and bad here. This curve is easy. Then I switched to the blowtorch and overheated it, and that's why that's all hazy. And then I started using these sanding blocks to push the acrylic. So I got one there, and I pushed one down on top to get that corner nice and crispy. And that works pretty well. I overheated that one a little bit, overheated this one a little bit on this end. But it does look like it might be possible. It's not going to be as sharp as the original form, obviously, but I think it should be okay. So this was a pretty steep learning curve to get these perfect, or at least pretty close to perfect. It turned hazy really close to the temperature that I wanted to form it at, which might be a red flag to anyone who has worked with acrylic before. And we'll figure out why that is later on in the video. But even with these issues, after ruining several pieces of plastic, I was able to get a pretty decent result. Alright, so the way I've been doing this is get this edge up to about 215, 220 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I got these two sanding blocks here. One just holds the top flat, and one comes in around the corner to get that crease. Once we get to the right temperature, which we are at right about now, take this block, put it on the top, other block around the side, push that in. And you hold it there until it cools down and holds its shape. All right, so we got two usable lenses here now. Neither of them are perfect, but we can sand them and polish them and get them pretty good. There's enough material for two more, so I'm going to make two more, and we can use whichever ones turn out the best, and then we have two backups in case something happens. So we got the last two lenses made and then moved on to smoothing and polishing them. The best way that I found to do this was to use this random orbital sander to smooth out any texture and lumps, and then I used a headlight polishing kit in the drill to shine it up. And we can see just here after smoothing it, the shape turned out really nice. It's almost exactly what I wanted it to be. Now polishing was a bit of a different story. This was incredibly time consuming and I couldn't quite get it back to its original finish. Acrylic shouldn't be this difficult to polish, and again, we'll figure out why in a minute. So we got these polished up as good as they're going to get for now. This one's more or less done. This one has a couple spots that I need to touch up, but I've been polishing for the last 3 days, and if I do it anymore, I'm going to go insane. So going to move on to getting this plaster off, and I'm going to try to get the lenses off without breaking them. So the plaster came off pretty easily, but the lenses were a little bit more difficult. So these lenses are held on with butyl rubber, which is pretty much just a long sticky rubber noodle, and that's pretty standard practice for old taillight lenses. Usually what people do is they'll put the whole taillight in the oven at a relatively low temperature, just enough to soften up the rubber so you can just peel the lenses off. That's what I was gonna do, but it was so dirty that when I looked in between the cracks, I mistook it for some kind of adhesive foam or something. And I wasn't sure what to do, so I just started prying on it, and just by pure luck, I got it off without breaking anything. So I've got this bottom frame piece traced out here. I think I'm only gonna go up to about right here, because when we take the lens out and lower our lens by about, probably almost an inch, this section is gonna have to step up to go over this piece, which is staying. So I've got my first piece in here. I think it went pretty well. I got the anvil on here just holding that corner down, but I put a bead of this cement around the corner. I'm using this solvent cement, so it actually melts the two surfaces together. But I think that went pretty well as far as I can tell. I don't know how visible that's going to be from the front edge, but I think we'll be okay. So with the first glue up seemingly going well, I moved on to cutting and gluing the rest of it. And since I used up all the plastic trying to form the main lenses, I took the two worst lenses and flattened them back out with the heat gun to use for the top and bottom border pieces. But as I continued to refine it and trim it up to get to the final shape, I figured out that the glue joints weren't quite as strong as they were supposed to be. So as you guys have seen, I've had some issues working with this material. It's been a while since I worked with acrylic, but it didn't bend the way I thought it would. It didn't polish up well, and the glue that I use that is specifically made for acrylic didn't stick very well to it. And a couple minutes ago, I was messing around, and I bent a piece of scrap material, and it didn't break. I have here a piece of acrylic from a different supplier, and you try to do the same thing, it breaks. So I went back to the Amazon listing where I bought this, and the title does say acrylic slash plexiglass, which are the same thing. And frankly, that's all the further I looked when I bought this. The images say PET plexiglass. I assumed that PET was the chemical acronym for plexiglass or something like that. And then the description just says PET plastic. So I looked it up, and PET is a completely different plastic from acrylic or plexiglass. They're not related at all. Um, so that's what this is. This is PET. I think it's still going to work okay for this application. It's a little bit softer and scratches easier, but we're going to be putting a film over this, so that shouldn't really matter too much. But I am going to see if I can package up all my scrap pieces and get a refund on this. Now, PET is pretty chemically resistant, so the cement just was not going to work. I figured the next best option was epoxy, but I didn't want to take apart the lenses since the cement was already holding them in position. So I took a cutoff wheel on my rotary tool and cut a trench between the two pieces to fill with epoxy. So apparently, epoxy does not stick well to PET. As soon as I started cutting that, this whole thing just popped off. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to test super glue on some samples, and if super glue sticks well, I'll probably just take all these pieces off, grind all the surfaces back to clean plastic, and then glue it all back on with super glue. All right, so I've got these all torn down, cleaned up all the old glue off, and plan D, I think we're on now, is to use super glue. I did a test with a scrap piece, and it seems to hold really well, and in my research, it seems to be the best thing that's easily accessible. So what we're going to do is we're going to tape this piece around the edge, get it in place, and then use the super glue, go around the inside edge, and hopefully it'll wick its way into that crack. I think it will. If it doesn't, then we can just do what we did before and cut a trench on the underside and fill it with glue. Now at this point, I was getting pretty frustrated with this project, and I seriously considered dropping it altogether. When I make a mistake on my own project, I'll own up to it and I'll fix it. But at this point, I had spent weeks struggling with the wrong material, primarily due to false advertising, and I was not happy about that. But I figured I was past the worst of it, so I kept working and slowly gained my motivation back as the project got back on track. And after breaking glue joints previously with the jigsaw, I decided to cut out the profiles with a cutoff wheel, although it does leave a lot of melted plastic on the edges to clean up. So I've got one lens rough cut, and the bottom fits in really well. The top would fit in well, except right here. So you can see on the original lens, the flange starts about flush with the top of the lens, and then it cuts in around the side. And you can see that on the original lens. It looks kind of goofy because the diffusion stops there, and I think that would look particularly bad on mine if I did it that same way. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna notch out my lens here to fit around this, so it'll go from being on the inside of this trench to on the outside, and I'll just have to seal that up with some windshield adhesive or something. It should be okay. So we got both lenses fit up pretty well. I ended up heating up the top section and bending it up a little bit to fit better in that crack. And I think we need to move on to this end of it. Originally, I was planning on making a wall down the center to seal off to right here. But then I realized it would have an ugly glue joint right in the middle of our taillight. So I think what we're going to do instead is take this piece, and you can see there's a big gap right there, but if we angle it like that, closes that gap, we can seal that off, and that'll give us a little more space between this piece and the back of our lens. So hopefully that's not as visible through the diffusion film. So we've got these shifted back on both of them. We retain the stock mounting points on the top and the bottom, so we can go back if we ever need to. Now this gap is small enough that we can fill that in. Now the next thing is, you can see that panel is hitting that, and the angle isn't quite right, and it's making it bend. So I think we need to make a slight bend right here so that this can lay flat. I had to do a lot of massaging with the heat gun and torch to get everything to line up. In a couple spots I overheated it and it turned that white color again. Now aesthetically this isn't a huge deal because I'm going to be painting over the top and bottom, but I learned that when you overheat it like that, it actually shrinks a little bit. So it took even more massaging and a lot of back and forth to get everything just right. So we've got all of our final edge pieces cut here. We have 2 of them gluing right now. In the meantime, there are these studs on the back of the tail lights that hold it to the body. One of them is broken. It's been broken since I've had the car. It would probably be fine if I just left it alone, but I have the time to do it right now, and it shouldn't be too difficult. So I think we're going to try to just tap that with like a 1/4-20 thread or something, stick a piece of all thread in it, and then put a big washer on it, and it should be pretty much the same as all the rest. This ended up working really well. I put a drop of super glue on it when I screwed the all thread in, and I locked 2 nuts against each other on the base of it to hold the washer at the right height. So functionally it's identical to the rest of them. So we've got all of our final pieces on here. It all looked really good. From here we're going to work on getting everything cleaned up, get some of this tape residue off, get the edges cleaned up, get it fit up to the housing better, and then give it a final polish. So we got both lenses more or less finished up. I've just got to polish up that corner, but I'm waiting for some glue to dry first. So in the meantime, we're going to get this piece sealed off. And to do that, I'm going to be using this urethane windshield adhesive. It's similar to silicone, but just a lot tougher. If you've ever used urethane suspension bushings, they feel a lot like that. So it's super tough stuff, but it's really nasty to work with. But that's what I'm going to be using. Now this is my very first YouTube video I've ever made, so please like, subscribe, share, tell me how stupid I am in the comments, anything helps get me some traction, and watch out for part 2 because these taillights turned out amazing.